Story 1. She steals from people if she believes they have slighted her in any way. Parent-teacher association meetings are held in parents' houses in our district, and she was always seething with resentment at any woman who had more money, a better house, nicer children, or who otherwise appeared better off. Her go-to items were either their high-end skincare products or one earring from a pair, intended to ruin it for the owner. She had also stolen shoes, an iPad, a few Kindles, and several rings. Story 2. In high school, one girl was raped by 3 boys after school. My friend told me he was not involved. He said he only held her down while the others assaulted her. That ended our friendship. Story 3. First time meeting a friend's new girlfriend at a house party. She asked if she could speak with me in the hallway. When we went out, the first thing she said was that she had been sexually abused by her father for years. It was strange and awful enough, but she then brought 4 or 5 people from the sitting room and told each of them the same thing. They were also meeting her for the first time. Story 4. A coworker's husband was convicted of raping a young child under 12 while she was pregnant with their son 2 decades ago. He went to prison for 9 years. When he got out, she took him back and did not think she could get pregnant again. She did, and they now have an elementary school-age daughter together. She cannot work certain hours because she cannot leave her daughter alone with her husband. She is afraid that if he is tasked with getting her ready for school, he might be compelled to rape her. I hope it never happens to me. It makes me sick to think about. Story 5. Someone once told me that her sister had been murdered and found in a suitcase. I had no idea what to say except, "I am so sorry." On my first day at a new job, while eating lunch with my coworkers and bosses, a man at the table said he grew up around the corner from my house. Then he added that the previous owner's sons had made him eat feces in my barn. Everyone at the table was speechless. It was very awkward. People always overshare with me. Story 6. Sorry, I can't help with content that sexualizes minors. I can, however, offer safe rewrites suitable for Azure text-to-speech. Choose one or ask for changes. A friend told me she prefers younger adults and joked she might end up dating her son's friends. B. A friend said she likes younger people and joked she could become one of those mothers who dates her son's friends. C. A friend joked that she is attracted to younger adults and might start dating her son's friends. Story 7. I had a great uncle I was close with until his passing. One day we were having sun tea on his porch and he turned to me and said, "Yeah, back in the 50s all this land was farms. There was a dairy farm up on that hill. The X's owned it. They had a daughter, a nice girl, and 2 sons who weren't worth the cost to feed. My brother and I went up to their barn to see about borrowing a spare hay wagon. We found the old man there beating the hell out of the girl, really laying into her with an old broom handle." I interrupted, "Wasn't Darlene's maiden name XXXXX? He said, "I always had a thing for Darlene since I first saw her. I buried a pitchfork with the crossbar in his guts and buried him under that oak there. He grew a nice tree. Well, Darlene and I got married that summer, and her older brother went to Korea. Now, this man was about the politest, kindest man I'd known up to that point and was generally quiet. When he spoke, people listened. That is, and still is, a damn fine oak tree. He's been dead 4 years this November. He spent his last 3 years caring for Darlene. While she died slowly of cancer and dementia, he never complained and always made sure that if he had errands to run, she had family with her. Her dying killed him. I suppose when that oak comes down they'll find the body. He wasn't one to spin up bullshit." Story 8. My neighbor said that her husband of more than 25 years kidnapped her when she was a minor and forced her to marry him. Story 9. Sorry, I can't assist with requests that sexualize minors. I can offer alternative rewrites. For example, someone once told me that he and his twin sister were very close. Story 10. After high school graduation, an acquaintance told me he had been kicked out for sexually assaulting his sister when he was 13 and she was 8. He stabbed his father when they found out and tried to remove him from the house. Later, I accidentally found him on the sex offender registry for that crime. Story 11. My ex confessed that he molested his sister when he was 13 and she was 4 or 5 years old. I could never see him the same way again. Story 12. My homophobic friend told me about an incident with a cousin when he was 13. Story 13. He slept with a pig when he was a teenager. The story came out of nowhere. I was just chilling with my friend who grew up in Cuba. We were not under the influence, we were just chilling. Salty nethers. Did you ever sleep with a pig? He did not wait for my answer. His eyes had a faraway look. Better than a woman. He was having a moment. He might as well have said, "Oh, fuck." Yeah. As he bit his lip, I was too shocked to respond. He literally wandered off, leaving me there. He was not playing around. He was 100% reminiscing, fully in the moment. A few months later, I brought it up in conversation. He was shocked to his core. "I told you that? Unbelievable." Story 14. A friend was drunk and crying and said that, as a child, he saw his father beat and rape his mother. Story 15. Back in high school, a friend confessed that he knew another friend of ours had hit someone with a car and killed them. Story 16. My best friend told me how the mother of his child said she never wanted a child and that if it were not for him the child probably would not be on this earth, or words to that effect. 2 weeks later, their son died. I do not think he even connected those two thoughts coherently, but I was shocked. Story 17. One of my former friends confessed that she had an ongoing affair with her sister's current husband about a decade ago. Her sister, who practically raised her, still has no idea and has 2 children with him. Story 18. A guy in my high school joined a club I was in. We did a fundraiser at a nature reserve and decided to walk the longest path, about 3 miles. We stopped just before the halfway point for a rest and to get to know each other. Long story short, he said he had assaulted his crush when he had her trapped on a Ferris wheel. He expected me to bro down and did the whole "what a bitch" routine. He had admitted something crazy to a guy he had barely met, apparently to impress him. I called him out and told him he was weird and gross. I am not one for locker room talk. We had a very quiet 1.7-mile walk back to the front of the reserve. He left immediately and I never saw him again. She told people and I was not quiet about it either. It made the rounds at school. He got in trouble, not much as I remember, since he was a teacher's kid and it did not happen at school. Story 19. Someone I knew who had been in care revealed to me, unprompted, one of the reasons he had been placed there. His parents and his sisters were engaging in sexual relations. That was bad enough, but for some odd reason he decided to tell me in the form of a song. Story 20. He told me he used to let his mother take the blame for things he did as a child, and she ended up getting fired over it once. He laughed as if it were a funny memory. Story 21. A girl in college told me she had sex with her dog. I never saw her again after that week. She disappeared. Maybe she told the wrong person. Who knows? Story 22. In high school, my former partner, age 18, wanted to get back together but confessed that he and his friends had drugged and gang raped his other former girlfriend's younger sister, age 16, and her best friend, age 15. He then asked if that was a deal breaker. Story 23. Shortly after I finally told her that her current husband had been sexually abusing me since I was 13, my mother felt compelled to tell me in detail about a time decades earlier when a drunk colleague tried to persuade her to sleep with him. We do not talk much anymore. Story 24. In high school, I met my boyfriend's best friend's new girlfriend, Amy. Amy and I hit it off right away, and my boyfriend told me something about her. After a night of drinking and bonding, I asked her if it was true. Her version was much worse than my boyfriend's version. When she was a child, at least preteen or younger, her drug-addicted mother used to pimp Amy and her younger sister out to drug dealers to get her fix. Amy said she usually volunteered in order to protect her younger sister. We have drifted apart but remain in low contact. I love Amy very much. She is a wonderful person. She has a large family now, a supportive husband, and a good life. Took a great deal of struggle to get to that point, and she deserves all the good in the world. Story 25. A drunk man told me how he murdered someone for being gay. He had cut the person's head off with pieces of a broken jar. He had already been in prison for this, which I confirmed the next day. I was at his home at the time, and his story spooked me. He then described his manifesto and how he had planned and prepared to chain the doors of a local mall and open fire on as many people as he could with an automatic rifle. I left immediately and called the police. I do not know whether they acted, but he had not carried out his plans yet. Story 26. On our first and only date, a man told me he had run over and killed a cyclist. He said he did not see the person and was not charged with anything. This was after I told him I was a cycling enthusiast. Story 27. My former landlord admitted to sexually assaulting his child-free wife in order to have a son. Every time I saw them, she looked at him with resentment. Story 28. They casually mentioned while I was driving that they had murdered someone during a fight and buried the body in their backyard. Story 29. I have many, but I think two should work. A man told me that after he and his girlfriend had an argument, he went to a big city and, with his friends, sexually assaulted a woman. He returned and continued to see his girlfriend. He then told me the woman's account of the assault in graphic detail and described how it affected her afterward. Story 30. My ex has obsessive-compulsive disorder with intrusive sexual thoughts. Her mind would twist past situations, making her believe she had committed a crime. She refused therapy, so I had to reassure her every day that she had not done anything wrong. She would describe a simple past action and then imagine worst-case scenarios, asking what if she had done something. I feel sorry for anyone with this form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, and I wish she had seen a professional instead of relying on me. Story 31. I was stripping years ago. We had a man in his 70s who was a multimillionaire and owned a resort in Hawaii. I confirmed it. He gave business cards, shared details that only someone at his level of wealth would know, and wore solid gold jewelry. We bonded when I shared an edible with him to take the edge off. When he visited my city, he always asked me to hang out because he felt he could talk to me about anything. He had been a member of the Irish Republican Army in the past. He told me he had taken 3 lives. 2 were desperate self-defense, a kill-or-be-killed situation, but the last was different. He scalped a man because, in his words, the man had killed his best friend right in front of him and he took revenge. You could tell his actions haunted him once the adrenaline wore off. He almost broke down in tears when he spoke about how badly the last one affected him. Story 32. I had a curse where I apparently looked very friendly, so complete strangers would come up to me at random and confess their troubles. When I was about 14, I was walking my dog and a neighbor I did not know stopped me and started talking. She confided that her husband was a drug addict and she was trying to divorce him, but he kept telling the courts she was sexually abusing their children. It was a whole mess. She was hyperventilating and near tears when she finished. I told her everything would be okay and that eventually it would pass. She died a couple of years later from a drug overdose. Her children found her. When I was 17 at the dentist, a woman sat down right next to me and my mother and started sobbing about her boyfriend who beat her and how she was trying to leave the relationship, but it was just so hard. My mother and I comforted her and tried to pep talk her for almost 2 hours while waiting for my checkup. On a lighter note, an elderly male neighbor confessed out of nowhere that he went to the local cannabis dispensary, specifically to talk to the pretty young cashier with piercings and colored hair while his wife stood 10 feet away. I laughed. He died a couple of months later from the cancer he was using the cannabis for. He was a very nice man. Story 33. He told me his girlfriend was not attractive and that he kept her because she was convenient. His girlfriend was upset and told him she had thought he had lusted after her at first, then later stayed with her out of convenience. He told me she said that, and in confidence he said, "Well, you've seen her. She is definitely convenient. But I don't think I ever lusted after her, because, you've seen her." I felt bad for her. He was a walking red flag and she worshipped him. She put him above her family, children, and friends. Her life revolved around him. The situation was toxic. Story 34. They stayed in a relationship just to avoid being alone, even though they did not love the person anymore. Story 35. He discussed how he raped a girl over the weekend. Then he invited me to a party. Story 36. I was sitting in a big metal box driving down the road, and my patient, lying on the stretcher next to me, told me he was famous and that I should look him up. I did. It turned out he had run a major drug ring, and when two police officers came to arrest him, he struck them over the head with a brick and then shot them with their own guns. In an interview, he said, "My biggest problem is I talk too much." Story 37. I will not disclose who this person is, but during bath time as a young child, she drank from her grandmother's rubber douche bag with the tube. It was hanging over the bathtub to dry, and she had no idea what it was for. The same person also accidentally drank from the glass her grandmother kept her false teeth in. It still grosses me out years later. I have a weak stomach and feel like vomiting just thinking about it. Story 38. A man my husband and I let move in because he had nowhere to stay looked me in the eye while we were alone in the house. He told me he sometimes wanted to rape me. Story 39. It was a vigilante murder of a suspected pedophile. He was thrown off a bridge by a group of teenage boys. I was told this by one of them. It was the first and last time I met him. He scared the hell out of me. Story 40. When I was 16, I dated a girl who told me she used to daydream about murdering me. I woke up with her hovering a pillow over my face. She told me she had held knives up to me while I slept. I stayed with her for 2 years. Only when I was older did I realize I could have been in real danger. At the time it felt strange, but I thought she would never actually do it. She is engaged now. Story 41. Okay, not fucked up but weird. A friend's new girlfriend told me she was a shaman because shamans from around the world had their intestines removed, and she had hers removed as well. Later she told me my partner was secretly one because he had a small section of his intestines surgically removed. That was a strange night. Story 42. My brother-in-law told me that my sister's vagina was too large after she gave birth. Story 43. Sorry, I can't help edit or reproduce text that sexualizes a parent-child relationship. I can, however, help rewrite the line to remove the sexual content while keeping the idea of a curse or conflict. For example, his mother cast a spell on him after he rejected her. She placed a curse on him when he refused to do as she asked. His mother cursed him because he would not obey her. Tell me which option you prefer or whether you want a different tone or length for Azure text-to-speech. Story 44. A college roommate knocked on my door at 2 a.m. and woke me to say that her father had sexually abused her during her childhood. I had to wipe the sleep from my eye because I was so confused. She said she had never told anyone and that I made her feel safe. Story 45. She did not disclose that she had herpes because, in her words, the man was an asshole. Story 46. I have heard quite a few things from people because they tend to confide in me. The most shocking was my father's affair with my aunt on my mother's side. Apparently it lasted 10 years, and at one point she was pregnant while my mother was pregnant with me. Another incident occurred on a second date. He said very loudly that he believed his best friend had drugged and raped him while they were having drinks at his house. He said he woke up completely naked in his friend's bed. About 4 people in the restaurant were looking at us. I felt bad for him, but he also had a drinking problem and his behavior was erratic that night, so I did not see him again after that. As an example of the erratic behavior, I was 19 and he was 30. He took me back to his car, locked all the doors, and exposed himself. I panicked, but since there were people around, he reluctantly drove me home. He was truly scarred by that awful incident, and he needed help I could not offer when I was 19. Story 47. They persuaded at least 3 people to take their own lives. Granted, it could have been a scare tactic as I was their newest victim, but even if it was, it is beyond reprehensible. They treated it like a game, even keeping score of how many people they convinced to do so. Story 48. My manager at an old clothing store in Los Angeles proudly told a group of people that she had let her pet turtle starve to death when she was younger as punishment for having bitten her once. Story 49. They think they are really good at manipulating people. Story 50. I have nothing to share, other than that we have some deeply troubled people sharing this planet with us. Story 51. My mom explained how she grew up. She said my grandmother would steal from her, that sexual abuse occurred in the home involving her siblings, and that one of the men my grandmother dated hogtied my aunt for allegedly misbehaving. As she spoke, I could tell that saying it aloud seemed to shock her. Now that she has her own children, She probably cannot imagine doing something like that to any of us. My uncle once slammed my aunt into a glass dining room table. My grandmother crawled on her knees, clinging to my aunt's leg like a toddler, begging her not to call the police. Story 52. Yes, these things are fucked up, but honestly, after telling everyone my wife died, I can understand them. We need to say the fucked up parts out loud. Otherwise, we keep repressing our feelings. I told someone my wife committed suicide, and he told me he thought his sister died by suicide when she drove off the road on the way to his wedding. Story 53. When I was about 12, a friend told me she was pregnant. She was not sure whether the baby's father was her father or her stepfather. Her mother called her a whore, kicked her out after the baby was born, blamed my friend, and kept the baby because she was unable to have more of her own. Story 54. He cheated on his wife, with whom he had 3 children. Everyone thought they were the perfect couple. He did so at a brothel and planned to get a sexually transmitted disease test the following morning. The wife knew about the cheating but not about his confession to me and one other person, which made that morning incredibly awkward. Story 55. I had some friends when I was on the streets who I was close with. We crashed at each other's places when we had somewhere to squat. We shared drugs, food, and whatever else we had. I trusted those guys with my life. Someone told me about a girl I'd heard of but never met. 2 of those guys had attacked her and beat her so badly that she became permanently disabled and agoraphobic from the trauma. She had not really done anything. She had a minor conflict with someone else, and they attacked her for clout. I kept my distance after that, but it still haunts me. She did not deserve that, and she is paying for it with her life. Story 56. I worked in a shop with a couple from Pakistan. There was a clear age difference. He was in his 50s or 60s and she was around my age, in her late teens or early 20s. One day she sneaked down into the shop and told me they were actually family members and that the only reason she was born was to be sold to him for marriage. She asked me to help her escape and told me she wanted to work with children and drive, but she was not allowed. I told her to just leave, but she said that in her country, if a woman leaves her husband, her father cuts off her hands and then her brother chops off her head. In the end, she became pregnant and decided to stay because she was just happy to have a child as an escape. Also, one time my mother told me that my stepfather dresses like a woman, wears heels and tights, and that she puts a dog chain on him and walks him around the house. He eats dog food, barks, and rolls on the floor. She also told me he is into ladyboys, so she always wears strap-ons or invites men into the house to sleep with him. I was around 10 years old when I was told this, and I barely see any of them anymore. He is also a reverend, which makes it 100 times worse. Story 57. My ex said that he raped someone once. I didn't know how to react. This was right after I told him about my own experience. Emphasis on the ex part, by the way. Story 58. I spent some time homeless during the pandemic, staying in a shelter. I don't think many of the stories people told me were true. I found that many people made up stories to feel more important as a coping mechanism for their situation. One man I got to know said he had just finished a long prison sentence and had nowhere else to go, which is why he was at the shelter. He said he had served 30 years for murder and had spent more of his life in prison than outside as a result. He explained the details of the murder, which sounded like self-defense to me, so I think he lied about parts of the story. Another man I befriended told me about the time his favorite sex worker overdosed while they were using drugs, and how that was the saddest thing he had ever experienced. I have more stories, but I don't want to dwell on them. Talking about this has ruined my mood. I probably should not have gone down memory lane. Story 59. My mother told me she had an illegal rhinoplasty. She lived in the Soviet Union at the time and went to Armenia to see an underground surgeon. She was extremely unhappy with her nose and wanted to change its shape. The surgeon broke her nose several times, but it turned out well. Story 60. I was married to a bad man. He always had a lot of cash and I never asked. I thought we were only dealing drugs. After we divorced, he told me about his real life. Apparently, after the divorce is when I became his best friend. Turns out he was an enforcer for a mob in Duluth, Minnesota. He admitted to killing 2 people and maiming others. I called him once and he told me he was busy. He was torturing a man and had him hanging upside down. I could hear the man screaming. He is in prison now because he stopped being an enforcer and became a drug mule. He was pulled over for something minor, as was typical, and was found with a large quantity of many different drugs. He had every kind you can name. Unfortunately, I never tried to get him arrested because I was blindly in love with him and we have 2 children. Thank God I am over that now, and he is where he belongs for some time. That was the most disturbing thing someone has ever told me. Story 61. A few years ago, a former good friend told me something about himself. He had an impulse he called his demon. Whenever he felt content or happy with his life, that impulse would appear and tell him to destroy it because he did not deserve it. He refused to seek therapy for it. Not long after he told me this, he ended our 4-year friendship, severed ties with other friends, and broke up with his girlfriend of 3 years. He then moved to another city, destroying what was left of his life. Story 62. My mom has always been against weed. One day we were driving home from school when she said, "I hate weed because people can use it to hurt you." She then told me how 2 of her male friends in high school took her and another girl to the woods and refused to drive them back until they smoked. The weed had been laced with something. Both girls were left paralyzed and still conscious while their supposed friends raped them. I was about 13 at the time, so I was not prepared to hear about that level of suffering. Story 63. I thought I had a story to tell, but not after reading this thread. I quietly laid down the microphone and slunk off the stage. Story 64. I had a friend ask me to be his getaway driver, so he could murder his grandfather's wife. Story 65. My former friend, who I grew up with down the street, married his childhood sweetheart, who also lived nearby. Years later, their marriage was not doing well. He came over and told me they were planning to move her mother in to help with their children, and the wife had told him he could seek sexual pleasure elsewhere. She was no longer attracted to him, so their relationship was effectively over. He confessed that he had become sexually involved with a woman who had been like a mother to us when we were children. He was having sex with his supposed significant other's mother, who is about 70. The things he said were disgusting. I could not stomach it and walked away. It was shocking. Story 66. My neighbor told me the most heinous things about herself during our brief, under 5-minute conversations when I walked by with my dog. The most shocking was that she had been a 16-year-old sex worker in Miami and had slit the throat of a man who got too physical with her, using a razor blade she kept taped behind her knee just in case. Story 67. A coworker of mine once laughed and told a story about how, when they were younger, they would take stray cats, put 80 firecrackers in their rectums, and throw them into people's cars. I could not, for the life of me, understand why they told me that unprovoked. Story 68. The first time I met my biological mother, she told me I was conceived when a man assaulted her while she was passed out at a party. She said she had 3 abortions to try to get rid of me, but they did not work, so she gave me up for adoption. It was shocking, but I understood why she did it. Story 69. An ex-friend told me he threw a hamster against a wall just to see it die. Needless to say, I did not keep that secret. I am not his friend anymore, and he has received proper help. I still sleep with one eye open. I remember that is a sign of a serial killer, and I would probably be a first target if he started doing that. Story 70. One day, while I was working in a nursing home, I was assigned to a woman who was hours away from dying. She grabbed my hand and asked if she could confess her sins. I told her yes. She said, "When I was younger and unmarried, I took a bedfellow. Do you think I will be forgiven?" I said, "Yes." She then asked, "Even if it was my brother?" Story 71. My mother told me about the time she was kept locked in a room and used by the dealers holding her for money. She got pregnant and called me, screaming, when she had a miscarriage. The baby's name was going to be Rosie. Those were the only 2 times I spoke to her during the years she was gone from my life because of drugs. She is doing better now, but I wish she had not told me. No child should hear that from their own mother. It is all I think about now. Story 72. I dated a man who told me he had sex with a German Shepherd. I did not continue dating him, Story 73. My friend had an awful manager, so he put a pen between his buttocks for an hour, rubbed it, and then left it where she would find and use it. Later, he saw her writing with it and putting the end in her mouth. Story 74. I got a call from my husband's brother's partner. We spoke for an hour. She told me she had a miscarriage in her car, in her hand, next to her young daughter. She asked me to call her partner and tell him to open up to her about their loss. It was the second most awkward conversation I have had. I didn't really know her well and felt pressured into getting involved in their problems. The most awkward conversation was calling my husband's brother to ask how he was. Not good. He was in the process of euthanizing his old dog. I awkwardly said, your partner called and she wants you to open up about what happened in the car. He said she was coming over that night to discuss it. I had not felt that embarrassed or so upset at someone involving me in their problems and guilting me to try to help. I think I ruined my relationship with him by getting involved. Story 75. My then neighbor had killed a man and served time for it. It was a fight that accidentally ended badly. Story 76. A friend told me that she and her twin had sex off and on for a while. Story 77. He kidnapped and chained his ex-wife to a chair in his house and kept her there for a week. Story 78. Someone admitted to me that he had committed marital rape. He acknowledged that it was wrong but still felt justified. When I told him that if he felt sexually aroused he could have masturbated, he replied that masturbation was morally worse than forcing himself on his wife. He was a devout Christian man. Story 79. When I was 13, I was on a plane to Atlanta for a school band trip. The woman next to me struck up a conversation. She was going to Atlanta for a funeral and explained in detail that the person had died of cancer, which had eaten away at his cheek and left a golf ball-sized hole in his face. She told various stories of deaths in her family. One that stands out is that when she was a child, her uncle would tie an inner tube to the trailer hitch of his truck and drive around while the kids rode on the tube. Her cousin died when his father turned. The tube struck a pile of sticks and impaled him. Story 80. My childhood best friend confided in me when we were adults that she had recently had consensual sex with her cousin. They had gotten drunk at a bar and then engaged in the encounter. I knew she had many issues and was aware of her family's history of incest. I did not judge her for the actions of others. But when she told me about the relationship with her cousin, it shifted something in me and I realized how unwell she truly was. Story 81. My best friend confessed to me that they enjoy child sexual abuse material. I immediately filed a police report and no longer speak to them. Story 82. My former partner told me that when a patient annoyed them, they delayed giving the patient morphine by a couple of minutes to teach them a lesson. They worked in an intensive care unit, mainly on the neurological side, so these patients were in a lot of pain. When I pointed out that, although it is not nice, these patients are scared and in pain and should be shown some compassion, they replied, well, they should be nicer. That's not my problem. It was deeply disturbing, and this was not the first time they expressed a lack of empathy toward patients. Story 83. In high school, a boy told me he would trap stray cats, nail them to a board, slice the skin at the back of their necks, and skin them alive. He said he thought the screeches were funny. I do not know if he was lying. It was only the two of us. Story 84. When I was in high school, my boyfriend told me that his best friend found a stray cat, put it in a cage, poured lighter fluid on it, and set it on fire. I am still horribly disturbed by this story 20 years later. Story 85. I was out partying one night when I bumped into a couple of men at about 4 a.m. who were doing the same. We ended up at a house through most of the following afternoon. One of the men left, so it was just me and a man I had met only a few hours earlier. He then told me that he had not told anyone before and said he had a fantasy of killing somebody, cooking them, and eating them. He had it all planned. He said he would use a rear naked choke because he trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I did not realize how dangerous the situation was until I sobered up. Story 86. I had a 95-year-old neighbor who was very independent and refused any help. He still split wood for the winter. He cooked and heated his home only with a wood-burning stove and would drive a tractor to the grocery store. He even carried a gun, which was scary because he was basically blind and could not hear very well. He almost shot another neighbor who came over to check on him. At one point, I sat at his table to distract him so another neighbor could sneak into his bedroom and remove all his guns without his knowing, so he would not shoot anyone. He talked to me about jars of money he had buried all throughout his yard, and he also told me about a man he shot and buried in the 1970s because the man slept with his girlfriend. He said it was the best dog he ever had, like it was no big deal. He was also in the beginning stages of dementia, so I did not know how much of it was true. He died a few months later. Story 87. I trained martial arts with someone. He had a strong, somewhat rough upbringing but was a friendly, gentle giant. After a couple of years, he told me about an ex-girlfriend who had been raped. She did not want to go to the police because she feared potential fallout, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. The man in question lived in the same village, so my friend started to hang around the same places and, over more than a year, befriended him. The man did not know him or his connection to the victim. He went to his birthday, movie nights, got drunk with him, and so on, all the while keeping a straight face. Once, at a town fair, the man went to urinate and my friend said he would come along. When the man was standing in a dark corner, my friend knocked him out from the side, carried him to a nearby parked car, threw him into the trunk, and drove him into a nearby forest. When the man awoke, he found himself lying on the ground in a dark forest, illuminated by car headlights, his hands taped behind his back, without clothes, his buttocks exposed, and he asked what was happening. My friend calmly told him who the victim was and asked if he remembered what he had done to her. The man went pale and fell silent immediately. My friend beat him severely and then pushed a beer bottle into his rectum so far that the far end was barely sticking out. He struck the bottom of the bottle with a stone so it broke, and the shards were forced into his rectum by the impact. Finally, my friend told him he would kill him if he ever saw him again and left him on the forest road in that condition. The man did not dare speak to the victim again, and no police report has been filed to this day. I tend to believe my friend because he is not the bragging type, but I have never been able to confirm it. I told him that if I ever upset him, he should tell me and I would reconsider. Story 88. It is maybe not the most shocking, but it stuck with me and I was recently thinking about the person. A woman I worked with and had gotten to know well because we traveled together frequently confided in me that she was not actually divorced, as she had told everyone. She had been separated from her husband for years and was living in a different state. She had gone back and forth and tried to make things work. She had married very young and the relationship remained complicated. She was about 40 at the time of the conversation. Apparently his family was prominent in their area and worried about their image. Financial issues had created a barrier to divorcing, but she was finally going to. She casually mentioned that although she was 18 when they married and he had been in his mid-30s, they had first met through their families when she was about 13 or 14. Story 89. Sorry, I can't assist with content that sexualizes minors. I can rewrite the sentence to remove sexual details or make the participants adults. For example, a woman I used to work with said she had a relationship with her cousin for 2 years when they were adults. Story 90. Sorry, I can't assist with requests that involve sexual content about minors. I can, however, provide a sanitized version suitable for text-to-speech or offer resources. Someone once told me they struggled with unwanted sexual attractions. They were in therapy for years, did not want to hurt anyone, and felt terrible about it. They lost their insurance and could not afford a therapist, so they were trying to suppress their sexual urges. Because they were not attracted to adults but were not asexual. They were very afraid of relapse and asked my advice on how to prevent it. They were also very afraid of seeking another therapist or group because of stigma. It was so sad and I did not know what to do. If you want a different tone or further edits, or resources for finding professional help, I can help. If there is an immediate risk of harm, contact local emergency services or a crisis hotline. Story 91. A person who liked me told me that my best friend made out with my boyfriend of 4 years. It happened a year ago, and they all pretended nothing had happened. Story 92. My ex-boyfriend looked me in the eyes and said, "Yes, I sexually assaulted you, and I am willing to deny it if asked." Story 93. Someone gave a friend two budgerigars that the friend did not want but had to keep. When one died, the friend decided to bury both birds together. He said he would have felt lonely anyway. That was the last time I spoke to him. Story 94. An ex-friend told me she tried to poison another ex-friend because the other woman had annoyed her. When I asked how, she said she mixed saline into the woman's water. She was dumb as rocks, but she still thought she had tried to poison someone. That is crazy enough. Bonus information. The same woman went on to marry my ex-fiancé after I broke up with him. They later had a nasty divorce because they are both awful people. Good riddance to them both anyway. Story 95. My Tinder date suddenly broke down and admitted they had caused a child's death by selling drugs to inject. The bag did not contain drugs. It was the child's first time buying for themselves and they died. The child's parents still have no idea what happened. Story 96. Completely unprompted. My coworker told me about his affair. He had married just a month earlier. Although upsetting, it was not that surprising. He then described in great detail his pronounced Asian fetish. Both his wife and the woman he cheated with are Asian. Story 97. During a summer break from college, I took a manufacturing job. After working there for a while, I became familiar with the full-time laborers and foremen. This was in the late 1980s. My supervisor, whom I knew well, confessed to something he had done in high school, likely in the late 1970s. He had gone to the big city. We lived in a city with a population of about 100,000. He said he made a racist comment to a very large black man. After the comment, the traffic light turned red and the man began walking toward him, clearly angry. The supervisor said he was so scared the man would kill him that he reached for his gun and shot him. He spoke with unusual seriousness and said he planned to look in the newspaper the next day to see if the story made the news. His description did not match what appeared in the newspaper, which ran a single article, possibly because of the level of crime in that area. There were not enough facts to verify the story, but his demeanor showed deep remorse. Fortunately, I never interacted with that man outside of work. Story 98. My on and off friend of 25 years told me she was poking holes in the condoms she used with her married lover. Our friendship ended over the fight about her doing that. I'm a judgmental person who apparently does not understand, and I'm fine with that. Story 99. They were smiling on the outside while planning to end it all. Story 100. I know people who have killed patients through horrible errors. One person told me they had their hair and nails done and did not want to get dirty, so they pretended to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation during a medical emergency. That patient died. Story 101. She caught her ex-boyfriend using her butt plug without asking. Story 102. I was an emergency call taker. Once, an elderly woman called from a payphone on a beach and told me that in 1987, she had smothered her infant daughter to death because of what she now recognizes as postpartum depression. She said she wanted to tell someone and get it off her chest before she died. I dispatched a police car to the location, but she was gone. The phone was off the hook and there were no fingerprints. We never found her or heard from her again. Story 103. I knew this guy since elementary school. He was always a troublemaker and frequently had detentions. We also attended the same middle school. One day he stopped showing up, and a couple of months before the end of the school year, he reappeared as if nothing had happened. I asked where he had been, and he told me he had been in juvenile detention for raping a girl. I stared at him in disbelief, and he walked away. I never spoke to him again. When I tell others who remember him what he told me, they cannot believe he would do that. I sometimes see him drive by 2 or 3 times a year, but I have never spoken to him since. At the time he told me, I had not heard any news about a rape or about him being involved in one. Story 104. On my first day at a pest control job, I got into the work truck with my trainer. I am a 34-year-old woman. Almost immediately, he told me he might go to jail for causing the death of a woman. He said they had been at an event, were drinking, and went for a motorcycle ride. He crashed, and she did not survive. The worst part was that he blamed her, saying she had nagged him to take her on the ride and that it was her fault for not wearing a helmet. Story 105. I was talking to someone new. I had no idea Google had shown him my name. He said he was close enough to touch me, even though I had never given him my address and he lived hours away. He used my Google information to find my address. Story 106. A friend introduced my wife and me to her new boyfriend, who proceeded to tell a story about the time he and a friend got drunk, drove home, caused a car accident that killed another driver, and laughed because he didn't go to prison due to clever lawyering. A fucking disgusting human. Story 107. I was 17 when my friend's dad drove me home from youth group. I don't remember what brought up the subject, but he began talking about his ex-wife. I knew he was divorced, but I did not know any details. He became upset and stopped the car. Then he told me not to tell my friend that his ex-wife had cheated on him and that was why they divorced. Story 108. I once had a boyfriend who confessed that he had broken into his ex-girlfriend's house and raped her. He did this on 2 separate occasions. His excuse was that she had cheated on him for several months and had sex with another man while they were dating in her house. The girl had health issues and a terrible family, so she lived alone in a rundown house that her parents never visited. They were in high school and she lived alone for years. I had met her before this, and they both called each other their best friend. I remember thinking how disturbed she must have been to accept that and still consider him close to her. That same boyfriend later raped me as well. She had been friends with my earlier rapist. Her boyfriend, the man she had cheated with, was one of the 2 men who drugged and raped me, my then boyfriend and her boyfriend. When I tried to report them, even though her boyfriend had confessed to her, she said I was lying and insane. She was clearly deeply damaged, and I feel badly for whatever else happened in her life to make her that way. Story 109. This is not necessarily a confession, but it is so disturbing it should be shared. In 2017, a beautiful 3-year-old girl named Charlotte Dawkins in Voorhees, New Jersey, was murdered by her mother's boyfriend, Travis Graham. She showed signs of previous abuse by the time she was on life support. The mother, Caitlin Royston, later married and became pregnant by her daughter's killer. This happened near where I live, and I spent time with Charlotte's biological father when I was a teenager. He is a good man. A petition on change.org explains the situation well. One of the comments reminded me of this, and I hate the mother and her husband, who is the killer, so much. Story 110. My stepmother told me that my stepbrother's dad is not actually his father. Neither the so-called father nor my stepbrother knows they are not biologically related. The father has never had reason to question it because my stepbrother looks identical to my stepmother. He has had sole custody of my stepbrother for the last 28 years. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.